want me to just, right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Give everyone some time to get on the Zoom. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are around the world. I'm delighted that you've joined us today. My name is Michael Boland. I'm Chief of Park Development for the Presidio Trust in San Francisco, and I'm also a member of World Urban Parks, one of the two organizations that's sponsoring today's webinar, along with the Epley Institute for Parks and Public Lands at Indiana University. Our webinar today is focused on strategies for building parks that connect youth to nature. As I mentioned earlier, this webinar is sponsored by World Urban Parks. World Urban Parks is a fantastic organization. If you're not a member, I encourage you to join and become part of the international parks and recreation community. World Urban Parks has a vision. That vision is a world where people value and have access to quality urban parks, open spaces, and recreation. It's a great organization full of committed professionals, all focused on making sure that everybody around the world has access to the best quality urban parks that can be. This webinar is sponsored by the North America group within World Urban Parks. And this is a map that gives you a sense of where we're located. We have members all over North America. In a variety of different cities, big and small, and a variety of different park systems. So it's a great way to get to know what best practices are in North America. Wanted to make a pitch for those of you that are joining us today for our next webinar. It's going to be a fantastic webinar on May 12th, focused on urban park developments and innovations in Latin America. And I encourage everyone, if you can, please join us for that webinar. I also wanted to thank our technology partner, Marmac. We've been working with Marmac to develop a parks audit. It's going to be a database of parks from around the world that will be searchable so that members of World Urban Parks will be able to run reports on parks and learn about different best practices around the world, something we're really exciting that we're going to be debuting very soon, a little bit later this week, actually. So stay tuned for an announcement about that. So our webinar today, as I mentioned at the beginning, is focused on strategies for building parks that connect youth to nature. And I'm really excited about this panel. You know, youth are one of our primary customers as park makers and park managers. And there's a lot of really exciting thinking that's been going on in the world around how we can engage youth in more meaningful ways, particularly in our rapidly urbanizing world. We're joined by several experts in the field who will bring their perspectives both at a strategic level, but also at a practical level for how we can make parks that really deeply connect youth to nature. Our first speaker today is going to be Sharon Dank. She's the CEO of Green Schoolyards America and someone that I've had the great pleasure of working with on a number of projects throughout my career. Our second speaker is going to be Rania Reyes, who is the Senior Project Manager at the Presidio Trust, the organization I work on, who's going to talk about a project that she's working on at the Presidio. And our last speaker is going to be Mark Camley, Executive Director of Park Operations and Venues at the London Legacy Development Corporation. Unfortunately, Mark is unable to present today, but he's shared his presentation with me, and I'm going to do my best imitation of Mark and try to present his fantastic park, because Tumbling Bay is a really extraordinary place, and Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park has done an incredible job of engaging youth. So with that, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Sharon Danks, to share her screen and to kick us off. Welcome, Sharon.
Thanks so much. It's so exciting to be here. I'm happy to be here with you all today. Can you see my screen? Yeah, great. So my name is Sharon Danks. I'm an environmental city planner and the director of a nonprofit organization called Green Schoolyards America. And I've had the chance over the last 20 years to go and visit school grounds and parks all over the world, partly in the context of another organization that I've helped to found called the International School Grounds Alliance, and in the process of researching a book called Asphalt to Ecosystem. So I've been studying school grounds and children's use of outdoor space for about the last 20 years. Most of the work I do is on the school ground context, and I see schools as potential parks. So they're relevant here, although it might not seem so at first glance. Our organization is trying to transform paved school grounds into more park-like spaces to improve children's well-being, learning, and play, while also contributing to the ecological health and resilience of their cities. And we're doing this for reasons that if we were able to make every school into a green schoolyard, we'd be able to connect every child with nature every day. So it's directly connected to thinking about parks. And so I thought I would start today with a kind of an overview of why we think it's so central to be connecting children with nature and how parks can help. This article came out in 2007 in England, that looked at an aerial photo of a community in England, but this could really be anywhere in the world, with 4 generations of a family, and trying to see how far an 8-year-old child could go from their house by themselves in different periods of time over 4 generations. And you can see that the biggest bubble there is 1919. The great-grandfather could go 6 miles from his house, whereas his child was only allowed at 8 to go 1 mile. His child could go a half a mile, and the son, who is the current generation, or actually probably closer to the parent generation because the article's a bit older now, but he could still only go to the end of the block. And the overall point is that children have lost the ability to roam our cities and to find the adventure and connect with nature and do other things that are out in their environment. And so they're limited now to the places that adults make available to them, which are usually their school grounds and also their parks. And so those places need to be exceptionally high quality to be able to provide the adventure and challenge and other things that kids in previous generations got to do by themselves. And this is in North America, truly a crisis in the United States, because the spaces that they have in our cities look like this more often than not, which is, our school grounds have become abandoned public space. So we look to parks as centrally important places to connect kids with nature. This is also an equity issue because when the kids aren't going far from their homes, they can only mostly see what's in their neighborhood, and green space is not equitably distributed across cities in North America, at least in the United States. We also see human access to nature as a human right, and children, this was reported, have less time outside usually than even prisoners in our jails. So we need to open up the doors and let kids out and stop scheduling them perhaps so much, so they have time to be outside to connect, because we can make wonderful spaces, but we also need to let kids go there. And I think also we have this context where the design profession and those who manage spaces have been looking understandably at what adults need from those spaces and are concerned about and prioritize convenience and risk aversion and aesthetics, but we need to think about those things in the context of what children also need and try to balance those needs with children's need for happiness. And how do we ask ourselves as people who think about parks and spaces for kids, how do we design to maximize children's happiness? So how can parks help? I think that we can return the key elements of childhood that kids are missing in that earlier graphic to kids' youth by adding places for exploration and discovery, adventure and challenge, and skill building, places to be spontaneous and to spark wonder and to let kids have self-direction and learning and engage with their peers, to shape their environment and to choose what to do, how to do it, and who to do it with, real free play. So I have a few points, 3 different areas to show you and some examples of each. And so I think the first thing that we can do also is to encourage youth to develop their own relationship with the natural world. And I've indicated on these pictures where these images are from. I've tried to draw them from around the world to show you that it's not just happening in one place, but we see these things all over the world. So how do we help youth develop their own relationship? First, I think we need to all across the world help parents get out of the way of the kids. If they're going to come to the park with the kids, we really want kids to be able to develop their own relationship with nature, and that means sometimes that adults might need to avert their eyes as kids test their jumping abilities, or do things that are not likely to get them injured, but are likely to help them grow as people. And challenge themselves and learn their own skills. So they need to be able to try new abilities and explore their world. It's nice and helpful to provide unusual experiences in these parks, things that get them to be excited and allow for spontaneity. My colleague Helen Nebelong from Denmark says, children and youngsters don't like bland, risk-free playgrounds. They're longing for natural spaces where they can meet one another prearranged or spontaneously and be challenged physically, psychologically, and socially. And this is her park, her nature play playground in Valby Parken in Copenhagen, which does just that. We need to let kids touch and collect and build and what they find outside. And I think that we, for many decades, have followed a look but don't touch mentality. And what this is doing is separating kids from nature. Many of the great naturalists of the world and those who are the staunchest defenders of parks grew up fishing and catching, in this case, in this picture, dragonflies, or finding small things and looking at them. And we need to touch nature in order to fall in love with it, David Sobel tells us. And if you only use look but don't touch, kids get cut off from nature and teaching them that nature is boring and that it's dangerous. We need to connect them further. We also have to expect the kids get dirty when they're outside and that is supposed to be what they're doing out there. And David Sobel, who is a great naturalist and forest school professor of teacher education and child development, tells us that nature programs should invite children to make mud pies, climb trees, catch frogs, paint their faces with charcoal, get their hands dirty and their feet wet. They should be allowed to get off the trail and have fun. And in this way, we want to let kids build forts and to move pieces of what they find in the natural world around. And it's here in the San Francisco Bay Area, for example, if a child doesn't have a park or a backyard to do it in, there are very few parks in the whole region that would officially allow a child to build a fort or climb a tree. And that means that because we know that they're not going anywhere else to do it, that they just don't have a place to do those things. So it's important to look at our policies and see how we can allow this to happen without harming the rest of the park, but give kids small ways to be interacting with natural spaces, because it's an instinctive human need to do these things. If we can design parks and children's spaces with plants that have lots of loose parts, diversity of interesting leaf shapes and colors, and things like this field of little tiny, what some might call weed flowers, then kids can pick things without disturbing the environment so much. And so here, like making a daisy chain is a harmless activity, but it connects the child to the place. And then thinking about how parks can draw out experiences with the different elements in the world, thinking about Earth, for example, a sandbox, although one of the oldest features of parks, is hugely successful and one of the best bangs for your buck, especially if the sandbox is big enough for a whole group of children to come in together. It invites interactive play. It's really engaging, and kids can be in that, can be together for a long period of time doing collaborative work. Earth can also take the form of topography, which allows kids to have different views on their park. If they go up high, it can teach them about soil and erosion, which might be a little challenging for the parks at time, but it might need some maintenance. But again, having places to explore and challenge themselves and experience Earth differently is also important. There are a few parks that allow children free play with fire, and it's really rare. But I did see it at an adventure playground in Tokyo, Hanegi Play Park, where children had a fire pit to do cooking. And on the left, they also amazingly had a hot tub that they were bathing in the middle of the summer on a fire, with their parents standing around, but not generally involved. It was amazing, but much more rare. Water as an element is more frequent in parks. At Britzer Garden in Germany, water is played with this way. On a hot day, it's really refreshing, and it was a big draw for kids. There's a lot of excitement in the faces of those children in this picture. And they also have more elaborate like channels with stones that kids can dam the water and understand the flows of water differently, experiment with properties of water. At Shoakinen National Park in Japan, there are some fascinating uses of air. Here they have essentially a fog machine coming out of the ground where you can see the air and experience it there. They have places for kids to suspend themselves in the air in nets, and also to feel what it's like to fly through the air on these amazing trampoline domes that are filled with air. And so when she came down, her little brother went up. And so it's, what does it feel like to fly through the air and bounce on air-filled forms? And then how do we think about parks as places to promote imagination and exploration and wonder? How do we create spaces that have open-ended opportunities that don't necessarily look like one thing or another, that allow kids to make up their own games and imagine themselves in a world that they create in their minds? Avoiding like single-use play items if we can. Thinking about how we can add mystery to parks by simply making paths disappear around a corner and go on a journey through the unknown. And if you have a mysterious path like this, you want to see what's on the other side. And so kids do follow paths like that to see what's over there. And blocking sightlines in some places is really useful to making that feel more mysterious and interesting. There's a researcher in Japan whose name is Dr. Mitsuru Senda, who's been working in the design of parks for the last, I think, 40 years or more. And he has looked at and come up with a model of play circuits or circular play. And he's noticed that if you have no path, you get the least physical activity in your park or children's space. If you have a looped path, you get more. It goes around in a circle. If that looped path has cut-throughs, you get more physical activity. And if it has loops, cut-throughs, and multiple levels, you get the most physical activity. So simply shifting the design of the park will give you more active children playing in it. And if you ask children what they want in their environments, that's exactly what they draw. I want to go up and over. I want to go up to the treehouse, take the zip line across, go down the slide, back up the climbing wall, under the pond in a tunnel. So it's the kind of language that they use, and it's no wonder that if we provide it, they play there. This is a park in Malmö, Sweden, that's based on the Pippi Longstocking books, and it has that kind of path design where you are playing hot lava, essentially, as a child, jumping from one thing to another, not touching the ground. And this draws kids through. Other parks provide places for kids to change their perspective, going up to be like a bird at the top of that structure to be in the nest. And then lastly, providing equitable access to parks is hugely important to be able to bring families and classes out together to parks. Recognizing that not all of our cities have equitably distributed parks and green space, and so it's correlated with income, unfortunately. So we need to work to change this by adding more parks where they're needed. We can do this like Copenhagen did by putting pocket parks next to many of the housing areas. Even small spaces like this one in Teardrop Park in New York are used and important. This is a similar kind of space in Taipei, Taiwan. This is an example of a Berlin schoolyard that transformed the whole site from a fully paved playground to a park-like space, and this is the nature connection that results from that shift. In Malmö, Sweden, the city also addressed inequality and inequity and social integration by making 30 outstanding parks and then encouraging that were so cool that kids wanted to travel across the city and convince their parents to take them to other places. So here's a soccer pitch that has undulations in the surface so the ball doesn't go where you expect. And so it's just an example of an unusual park that draws kids through, surrounded by nature. In Sweden, in Lund, Sweden, there's park systems that have built outdoor classrooms for schools to invite them out to consider parks part of their learning environment for the school day. So each of 3 schools has its own space that they've designed to be an eco base, they call it, like this one. And also nearby in the same city in Lund, they have a nature reserve that has outdoor classroom spaces that are filled with children and classes all the time. And they also have engaging places like this in the same park for younger children to play and have nature experiences and use natural materials in a nature playground. And the same park also has a great pathway that I love that makes challenges. It was designed collaboratively with someone in a wheelchair who wanted to have an engaging, exciting experience. And so the pathway is not flat. It does have undulations, it has textures. It takes all people on an experience through the woods. And in one case, it has bumpy spots and also a place where the path itself actually moves, and it's a bit exciting and challenging. And so the idea is just to have challenge and excitement for everyone in the spaces. And lastly, to make children's happiness a central goal in everything that parks do, and to remember that think about the kids' experience first and design around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. That was fantastic. I mean, what an incredible survey of best practices for creating parks that are really relevant and compelling and engaging to young people. So thanks for sharing your experience and your trip around the world, whirlwind through the world of youth play spaces. So next, I'd like to invite Rania to share your screen and talk a little bit about the project you're working on in the Presidio of San Francisco. Rania.
Thank you, Michael. I'm sharing right now. Give me just a second. Can you all see my screen? Oh,
not quite yet.
Sorry. I need to share.
All right.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Oh, there we go. Okay. Everyone can see? Can you see my screen? Okay. All right. Hi, I'm Rania Reyes. I'm Senior Project Manager in Park Design and Construction at the Presidio Trust in San Francisco, working with Michael. For the past 7 of my 16 years at the Trust, I've been managing the landscape design and construction of the tunnel tops, the project I'll be discussing today. It's been both challenging and exciting, so I'm really delighted for this opportunity to present to you the part that's been the most fun to work on. I'll start with a few words about the setting. For those of you who don't already know this, the Presidio is a national park site at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge. It's a former military post and also the birthplace of San Francisco. This spectacular site is really like an oasis at the mouth of the bay. And since its conversion from post to park, it's become a much beloved refuge for Bay Area residents. It's not only a cultural landscape, but also a biodiversity hotspot at the heart of this major metropolitan area. So what better place to bring urban youth closer to nature? I'll preface by saying that the Presidio Trust is committed to reaching underserved communities, to delivering rich experiences and helping improve the community's health. Now more than ever, we understand the importance of giving city kids access to nature. Even pre-pandemic, we recognize that fighting the surge in juvenile obesity, diabetes, even depression means getting children outdoors and connecting them with nature, just like you heard from Sharon. So a major opportunity presented itself in the early 2000s with plans to rebuild Doyle Drive, which is an old segment of highway that connects San Francisco to the Golden Gate Bridge. It slides through the Presidio, physically separating the waterfront from the rest of the post. The new highway put two major sections in cut and cover tunnels, which created new open space and a chance to stitch together the historic core of the Presidio and the Bayfront. That led the Presidio Trust, in partnership with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy and the National Park Service, to hold an international competition for the design of this new parkland. James Corner Field Operations, or JCFO, the firm best known for the New York High Line, was the winner. The design gracefully spans a landscape over the new tunnels with a series of gardens, meadows, picnic areas, and walkways that provide strong connections to the waterfront. At the base of the bluff, beyond the tunnels, there's a youth campus and a large outdoor space for learning and play that we call the Outpost. But before I dive into the Outpost, let me share just a few more images for context. Here on top of the tunnels, large grassy meadows surrounded by gardens will provide open expanses to throw a picnic blanket, fly a kite, or just simply relax. There are many spots to lounge and enjoy the stunning views. For example, the cliff walk at the top of this rendering, or the Presidio steps, these grassy terraces in the foreground. And beyond to the right is the Outpost. In this view looking south, the cluster of buildings at the bottom left are the field station, an indoor activity space for the community, and the Chrissy Field Center, an environmental education facility for San Francisco youth. To the right is the Outpost. It's a fun nature playscape where kids and families can connect with the Presidio's nature and history through play, exploration, and hands-on activities, all of that for free. So you might wonder, how is this all funded? Well, it's largely through generous donations and the incredible fundraising effort led by the Parks Conservancy. So now that I've given you some context, let me describe the design process for the Outpost. What JCFO had in their competition scheme was simply a placeholder for a play area, the yellow zone in the rendering. And honestly, none of us had a clear idea of what it should be. But after distilling thousands of comments received through the public engagement process, we realized it had to be a one-of-a-kind play and learning environment set in nature. So our task was to create a place unique to the Presidio where kids of all ages and their families would enjoy memorable moments. And that includes unprescribed play, allowing children to create their own experiences, allowing them to get dirty, feel independent, explore their creativity. In other words, just letting kids be kids. And JCFO understood these aspirations. Their initial concept was to create a series of outdoor activity rooms carved into the landscape. So while the designers were refining this concept, the Trust and our partner agencies worked on identifying the types of experiences we felt were important to include. And the wish list was quite long. But for the most part, things fell into the following categories: discovery, exploration, observation, adventure, creativity, and challenge. And in our research, we found wonderful examples around the world in Australia, the UK, Japan, the US, Canada, many like the ones Sharon just shared with us. So to validate our aspirations, we held a workshop and invited a panel of experts to discuss learning and play. Among them were a playground designer, an artist, a museum curator, and a pediatrician. In fact, Sharon, again, who just presented, was the speaker. Our main takeaways from the workshops were the following: that nature-based experiences are essential to children's health, that kids learn best through play, physical mastery of their environment, and risk-taking, that unstructured, non-didactic experiences foster creativity, confidence, and independence. So to sum it up, kids learn from doing and grow from failing. So we left knowing we were on the right track, but how do we achieve this? Create an immersive experience that's exciting and safe. Like us, JCFO were inspired by all the conversations. They took this notion of unstructured play together with their initial concept of outdoor rooms and expanded it to design a labyrinth that weaves together pathways, planting, and play features. The result was this: a maze of immersive experiences set within a microcosm of the Presidio's landscape with woodlands, coastal bluffs, and coastal dunes. And to help with the play structures, we brought on Earthscape, a Canadian company specialized in custom play equipment using natural materials. Together with JCFO and the Trust, they developed a series of really fun ideas for a variety of physical challenges, expanding on the notion of place-based experiences. And to make sure that all the accessibility and safety standards are met, we also brought on a playground safety inspector who actively participated in the design sessions. For these play elements, we drew inspiration from the Presidio's history and natural attributes. We organized them along a continuum of graduated beneficial risk, challenging kids physically and emotionally. I'll describe a few examples of how we've grounded these features in Presidio stories. This water and sand feature for the little kids is inspired by the Presidio's history of water conveyance. The wooden channels evoke flumes built by the Army in the 1850s to convey water to the northern bay shore. The Bluff Slide is situated within a mound of boulders, reminiscent of the rugged bluffs and defensive promontories along the Pacific built to protect the Presidio. The fun for kids is not only sliding down, but also clambering up the boulders to the top. Now, the fallen tree reflects what happens in our aging forest after a big storm. Kids will not only be able to climb and balance on it, but also crawl into it, kind of like animals would. And finally, the forest den, the most challenging to climb on. This feature evokes the piles of natural debris and the forest on the forest floor and the beautiful spider webs within. So these play structures are arranged in the southern part of the outpost, as you see at the bottom of this plan, and they increase in challenge from east to west to encourage kids to push their own boundaries and build confidence. The northern portion in pale green is about observation, fine motor skills, and sensory experiences. Spaces for art, science, and building will accommodate drop-in as well as guided activities. And while the team was developing the design, the Presidio Trust prototyped the outpost over the course of a whole summer to test its offerings and activities. The results were very positive. One of the things we learned is that self-directed exploration was far more popular than structured guided experiences. Whoops. Yeah. So where are we with construction? Let me show you the play features that have been installed to date. Starting with the hydro tunnel, it's a really simple concept, but incredibly difficult to execute. Here's what's involved in fitting a boulder landform over and around a wooden tunnel. First, the wooden tunnel and its protective steel frame were built in Earthscape's shop in Canada. Meanwhile, here in California, we hunted for large boulders and created a mock-up at the quarry to make sure they all fit together. And after a very meticulous process that took 2 days and several tries, these giant boulders were tightly assembled on site around the wooden tunnel. Et voila, almost complete. Once it's surrounded by plantings, this landform will blend with the landscape. Now, my personal favorite, the fallen tree. As I mentioned earlier, it mimics one step in the natural cycle of an aging forest. This one is a 250-year-old white oak that fell in a storm near Toronto. Earthscape had been tracking it for a while, and when it finally fell, we all agreed that something wonderful could be done with it. It was sawn into 3 segments, then debarked and carefully carved to remove all rot and eliminate any hazards. And in early January, it made its long journey to the Presidio on 3 flatbed trucks to start another life. It took a large crane a whole day to place the 3 segments on their foundations. And let me tell you, the scale is truly stunning. I'm just itching to climb into it myself. This one we're calling the Bowline Swing. It's a bit more organic and social than a traditional swing, and it's inspired by the Presidio's maritime history. Working together, kids can rock it back and forth like the motion of a ship. It was fully assembled in Canada, where Earthscape tested it to make sure it meets the safety standards. And additional safety inspection was performed on site during installation. Now, this nest in the sketch was inspired by an oriole's nest, which hangs from trees like a teardrop. It was fabricated in Canada and delivered to the site, fully assembled, ready to be set on its foundation. It's about 15 feet tall, and kids will be able to climb on the outside and the inside. The notched posts around it are part of the climbing experiences, kind of like canyoning. There are 2 levels of nets in the interior that are fully accessible from below. And by the way, the big kids on the right is me, by the way, just testing it. Another way to get in is through an opening at the top, like an oriole would, and stand on the upper net to look out, perched like a bird. Next is the Woodland Wall, which evokes the tightness of the forest as the Army planted it. The holes and knobs for climbing are a reminder of how these trees support wildlife within their trunks. And you see it here being assembled on site. Kids will be able to climb up and into the opening, then make their way down a secret path behind the wall to repeat the climb. Notches and knobs of various sizes and shapes were tested by the team's own expert kit to function as hand and footholds for climbing. And finally, the forest den, which is built from a network of logs, ropes, and nets. The contractor has done a great job carefully assembling this complex feature layer by layer, and it will offer lots of fun climbing challenges for the kids. In this view within the den looking out, you can imagine kids climbing and balancing on the top or just hanging out on the nets inside. So we still have a little ways to go before the Outpost is complete. There are all the northern activity spaces to build and furnish, for example, the art space and the builder space. A fun fact I want to mention is that we're repurposing Presidio logs from our reforestation program for edging and terracing in the Outpost. And logs are also milled in-house to build boxes and sheds that we'll place in the Outpost to store tools and materials for the activities. Now, zooming out this aerial photo taken last week, you can begin to read the shapes of the Outpost, but there's still all the upper layer to install. And what I mean by that are all the pavements, the play surfacing, and the planted landforms. So you might be wondering, when will this all be done? We expect construction to be completed by late fall of this year. And I do hope you'll be able to visit the Outpost with your family next year when it opens.
Awesome. Rania, thank you so much for sharing your experience creating the Outpost. So as I mentioned at the beginning, our third speaker was unable to, Mark Camley was unable to join us today. So, but I do want to share the incredible play environment that they've developed at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park with everyone. So I apologize in advance if I describe Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in the wrong way for any of those of you who know it, because I'm winging it here a little bit. But Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park is a fantastic, remarkable transformation. It opened in 2 phases, in July of 2013 and in April of 2014. And it's really the heart of London's major regeneration of the site that was used for the 2012 Olympics. All right. And the park sits at a really interesting location in London. It's an area that is predominantly low income, and it sits really at the intersection of these 2 corridors, 2 deprived corridors in the London context. And so the goal was really to create a new metropolitan district within London, with the heart really sitting at the park and really activating this new part of this new district in London. And so this is how they began. And it has really come a long way. I remember the site right after the Olympics, and it reminded me a lot actually of the Presidio when we started here, which was a place that had been used for a different purpose, but was largely derelict and had a lot of opportunity. Since 2005, when London hosted the Olympics, the site has been really transformed. 4 schools have been built, about 4,000 homes have been built. There are 3 universities working in the park, and there's still more to come. And already the park receives about 6.5 million visitors a year. So it's a very heavily visited park, heavily used by the surrounding community, but also heavily visited by visitors from more remote parts of London and around the world as well. And this transformation is really a multi-dimensional transformation. There's an urban transformation, but there's also an ecological transformation. And I remember visiting a couple of years ago this incredible river and canal restoration project that is really quite beautiful. And it's amazing to be in the middle of London and come down and enjoy the stream corridor and to see wildlife using the restored banks of these streams right in the middle of town. Really an incredible resource. But those wetlands also perform really important ecosystem functions, protecting about the 5,000 homes that are on the south side of the park from flooding. And as I mentioned earlier, providing a really wonderful wildlife habitat right in the middle of town. But the site is a really important economic development and urban development project as well. And as I mentioned earlier, they've built really a whole community with housing, a mixed-use development with housing. This is an example of some of the housing that was created from the former Athletes Village, sprinkled with green space, really trying to create a kind of green city in the middle of London. But one of the big priorities for the team working on the transformation of the Olympic site was that it should continue to be a place for the community to be and for the community to play, and especially prioritizing one of those communities within the broader community for which play is so important, which is youth. That this should be a place where youth from all walks of life can come and really enjoy this incredible outdoor amenity, because social equity is one of the key reasons that this big park transformation was being made in this community, so that low-income communities in the area would have access to green space. And so the team began by looking at a number of different parks and play environments for inspiration. One of the key ones was the Princess Diana Memorial Playground in Kensington Gardens, which this is an image from that, another incredible play space. And they came away from that exploration of existing parks with a number of best practices or strategies that they observed that were working, that were really successful. The first is that it should really feel natural and be authentically natural rather than a synthetic version of natural. That it should create opportunities for free play. And we heard a little bit about this from Sharon earlier, that children want to and need to be able to take risks, take measured risks and challenge themselves so that they feel engaged and excited and they want to actually come back, return, and continue to challenge themselves and hopefully develop skills that they can take into their adult life and hopefully connect them to the outdoors. And so this idea of graduated risk is something that was really important that they pulled into their thinking about the play experience at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. That it be multi-generational, that there's benefits in having children of all ages interacting with each other and interacting with adults, so that this is an environment where kids are not isolated into smaller subsets, but rather where kids of all ages can interact with each other. That it's really important that spaces where kids can engage in unsupervised play be created. And I think Sharon spoke to this really nicely when she talked about the home range of children and how that's changed over time. That one of the things that we're seeing is that young people are never away from their parents, they're never unsupervised, and yet developmentally that's a really important experience for young people to have. And then they noticed a really interesting pattern, that it's really important that there's a space for younger children, and that space for younger children be located near the toilets and near a cafe, so that their parents can have a cup of tea and they can supervise their kids, but also so the younger kids can quickly run in and use the bathroom. So I love that they came up with a TNP philosophy as a fundamental philosophy for how they're going to organize their play environments in the park. Lastly, they began to look at funding strategies, not just best practices in terms of the design, but also best practices in terms of funding. And we're very fortunate to have landed a £1 million gift from the London Marathon Charitable Trust to fund their first effort, which was Tumbling Bay Playground. They also were very lucky to have brought on a really excellent advisor. And this is something I know that we've done as well at the Presidio in the Outpost that Ranya's talked about, bringing in a whole array of advisors to make sure that whatever crazy ideas that we come up with in the Presidio are actually anchored in safety standards and in code, and to make sure that we're keeping our young people safe. On this playground, they worked with Tim Gill, and actually in his recent book, The Urban Playground, features Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. And so I encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about this project, that you check out his book. So the playground that they've developed, one of several, but this first big effort was at Tumbling Bay. And Tumbling Bay is really designed to embody all of those best practices that I described, gleaned from this experimentation or this exploration of other best practices and other existing playgrounds. And there's some features that I think are really exciting. The first, I remember when Mark told me about this, is that there's a climbing structure at the northern end of the playground that allows kids to get up to 18 meters above ground, which is really high. So for me, who's a little bit afraid of heights, the idea of being a young person and being 18 meters off the ground on a climbing structure sounds really thrilling and is really quite extraordinary. Tumbling Bay also is an environment where children can get away from their adults. They incorporated this notion of limited sight lines. And I remember Mark mentioned that one of the things that's interesting is that it's usually the parents that come looking for the kids rather than kids that are looking for their parents. You know, that we parents seem to have a shorter fuse when it comes to being away from our children than our children do. Which is something I'm hoping we'll talk a little bit about when we get to the Q&A at the end of the session. That they built into Tumbling Bay a series of different experiences that allow kids to take graduated risks. And they added some native plantings and some challenging ones like gorse plant, which is a big prickly bush. I know because it's an invasive exotic here in California. That it's a pretty rough bit of plant, and but the idea was to make it sort of playful and fun and challenging for kids, something for them to experience. And that they also built into this flexibility in terms of the different kinds of ages of children that can play. And so some areas at the northern end are much more challenging, and then at the southern end is an area that is really designed for more flexibly for younger children and children of different abilities, where they can get dirty and get muddy, play around, and interact with the environment in new and different ways. So there were a number of challenges that really the team had to overcome to develop this playground, and I think they're important because a couple of them to note, because I think I know we face some of the same challenges in the Presidio and the Outpost that Ranya's talking about, and I think they're universal. The first is these environments are really pricey, and you know, they're highly used, but they also have to be incredibly well built. And so I think every park municipality faces the challenge of finding the resources that they need to be able to fund these, you know, on a per square foot basis, really, really expensive kinds of environments. But of course, the value for young people is important. The second thing is working with natural timbers. And this is another thing that we've really wrestled with, this idea that, you know, unlike plastic and metal, natural timbers, they erode, and you need to create an inspection regimen and a maintenance protocol, and make sure that you're not inadvertently creating an unsafe condition. And so I think that we went into this believing that working with natural timbers might be a cheaper solution, but in fact discovered in the course of our work that it's very expensive to do it well and to do it safely, and it presents certain ongoing maintenance challenges that are really important to commit to make sure the playground stays safe. Of course, there's also the challenge of just convincing the management of the park that an environment like this, where kids can get 18 meters off the ground, is actually safe, that it's not going to put an organization at risk. And I know Mark mentioned to me that this was true at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. I know that it was something that we had to talk a lot about in the Presidio as well. So this question of how do we get internal alignment and internal sign off on the idea of creating an unconventional play environment that really engages kids, but allows them to take risks. Another challenge is security and safety. And I know that at Tumbling Bay, there's an extensive camera network that allows them to monitor what's going on. That has been a really important public safety and security tool that they've used for a variety of purposes. And I'll actually return to one of those in a second. There's the whole question of liability and insurance. Every park in every country is in a slightly different situation regarding that, but that's certainly something that we at the Presidio had to wrestle with as well. Excuse me. And then there's the question of what's next. And what I think is really exciting about Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park is that Tumbling Bay really was proved that play is a vitally important role that this Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park can play in the life of the community. Tumbling Bay receives over 500,000 visits a year, which is an incredible level of activity. And so it really inspired the team at Queen Elizabeth to make play central to the identity of the park, and also inspired them, gave birth, if you will, to many children, a whole array of other features that are incorporated into the broader landscape of the park to really cement the idea that play is a fundamental aspect of the public life of this incredible park. So for example, they added the world's largest covered slide, which is this incredible feature. I forget how many stories it is tall, but it is an incredible slide. If you're ever there, I encourage you to definitely take it for a spin. They created climbing walls from an old bridge abutment. incorporated reclaimed timber into slides that are scattered around and created a series of freestanding play experiences and environments scattered through the park. Created a wonderful play fountain, working with James Corner Field Operations, the team that is also working actually on the Outpost in the Presidio for us. But created other opportunities scattered through the park for water play and for climbing. And also created a series of one-off activities, sort of activations that bring life and vitality to other parts of the park that are really oriented to youth and to engaging young people in the landscape of the park. Now, I asked Mark a little bit about accidents, and he has said that they have had a couple, but that one of the strategies that they've used to protect themselves are actually the cameras, and that they were able to use the footage from the cameras from the two instances where the young people hurt themselves. We had he said that in one case there was a child that slipped off a log at the bottom of the slide. In another case, a child fell off this mound. They were able to demonstrate using the footage from the cameras that in fact there were other circumstances that were the reasons the children fell off these features that wasn't related to the features themselves. So, which I thought was a very, very interesting use of cameras. But also reinforce the notion, and this is something that we've experienced in our own park, and I'm sure others have as well, of the importance of maintenance, that making sure you have a maintenance regime in place and that you're meeting those maintenance requirements on an ongoing basis, that limits one's liability and ensures that the playgrounds and play environments stay safe. Lastly, 2020 has, like so many of us, made us all think about what it takes to make play environments safe. Like everyone, Queen Elizabeth Park and Tumbling Bay has really been struggling to try to understand how to fulfill the need for young people to get outside and get exercise and stay safe, while at the same time recognizing the potential risks inherent in crowding during the COVID pandemic. I thought the sign at the right was very funny. Mark told me that when they were working on signage for this new climbing structure, they actually checked in with a local climbing school and asked how they signed their climbing walls. And the recommendation they got was that the sign should say, "You could die doing this," which I thought was really child friendly. Luckily, the team at Queen Elizabeth decided to go with something a little more nuanced, which is what you see in the right. But I think it brings up a really important question about how you strike the right balance between being friendly and welcoming and encouraging, while at the same time making sure that you're clear that some of the activities that these kinds of play environments create can actually be risky and can result in personal injury. So at Tumbling Bay and at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, I'd say there are really four primary takeaways that we've heard really throughout across the three presentations that we've heard today. The first is that that play should challenge children, that this idea of beneficial risk is really important, and that it allows children to test their own ability while they're playing and to develop new skills and also become stronger and build a connection to the outdoors. The play should be fun. And lastly, that it's important that playgrounds balance risk, balance with fun and challenge, so that we can create environments that really engage our young people and help them develop into active users of the outdoors. So with that, I'd like to ask my panelists to turn on their cameras. We have a couple of minutes for Q&A. And, I just first wanted to thank you both for presenting the work for the work that you're doing. Sharon, I think that your presentation gave us just a fantastic overview of the current state of thinking about how young people can be engaged in how we can build play environments where young people are really engaged in nature. And Rania, I want to thank you for sharing with everyone the thought process through the development of the Outpost. You know, what really struck me in both of your presentations and also in the material about Tumbling Bay is the question of not so much about how we need to protect our kids, but how we need to retrain adults. And so I wondered if either of you had any comments to share about how we all should be retrained to create a world where young people are actually empowered to challenge themselves so that they can have these kinds of experiences in their daily lives.
It's a good question. I think that with the graphic with the 4 generations, what it evokes to me is that, you know, we might know what we did as kids and we can look back at that as parents. We definitely know that. We might know what our parents did as kids, but we don't know what our grandparents did as kids. Those stories haven't come down to us. So we only have 1 or maybe 2 generations back to think about it. And so it's invisible, this loss of child self-determination. And so thinking about, you know, what kids need. I have a friend from Sweden who said when he was a parent and he was worried about his child falling, his friend said to him, you know, Petter, turn around. You know, it's not about us. It's about them. And, you know, about making the kids are good risk assessors if they can see the risk. And so I think some of the things we do by accident is to obscure the risk. And so ironically, when we add safety surfacing, we are telling a child visually that that place is now safe. Adults have fixed it. And so they do things that they wouldn't do if that was asphalt. So the injuries happen, at least on school grounds, mostly when a child leaps off of a play structure to grab a ring that's in the air and they hit the rubber surface, which doesn't give way when they fall, and they break a bone. And because that surface was not meant to protect children from bone breakage, it was meant to protect only against death, right? And so it actually causes more long bone fractures. But if that had been sand, it would have dissipated the fall probably. And if it had been asphalt, the child wouldn't have jumped. They would have known it was too far. And so we just have to think about how we shape those environments and that allows kids to read or not read the risk accurately. And that shifts injuries too. And thinking too about lifelong health versus immediate impact. And so like we all want kids to move and protect them against diabetes and heart disease and things that they need to do things that they benefit from being fit. And the short-term injuries are more often just splinters and scrapes that are minor, and the benefits are physical health. And in Germany too, it's fascinating. They look at making as many surfaces in their playgrounds uneven and irregular as possible so that kids learn as children to look down and watch where they're going, because it's easier to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and not break a bone when you're 5 than it is if you're 65 and you have never learned to look down and you trip and you break a hip. And so they're trying to improve lifelong health by teaching kids about being aware, you know. So I think it's awareness. And I don't know if that gets back to adults, you know, where the adults fit in that, but we just have to like think about it, I think, and common sense and letting kids be kids.
Just one more thing I want to add is we tend to think that we are the best teachers, but one thing we underestimate as parents and adults is kids learn a lot from other kids, from older kids. So kind of, you know, that's something to think about as well. And then, you know, the other thing is some of these play experiences, if families can be like parents and grandparents can be part of it too. I know we want to let kids, you know, be off and independent and on their own, and that's when they learn the most. But I think there's a lot of value also in having play be kind of a family experience. I did that a lot with my family growing up.
Yeah, agreed. All right, we have another question, which is, are access routes planned into projects when trees, logs, or when trees, logs, or other natural elements with a limited lifespan eventually need to be replaced? Yeah, great question. So, Rania,
Yeah.
tell me you've planned that into our house.
Yeah, we do have obviously think that the wood is going to decay, and we do have a central spine. I don't know if you remember the plan of the Outpost, but that is wide enough for maintenance access and for getting things like this, like logs replaced, and you know, things are gonna, the play structures are gonna have to be maintained. Michael, you touched on that. It's the maintenance regimen is so important, and that all requires access.
Yeah, thanks. You know, God, there's so many things we could talk about. You know, Sharon, I was really struck by one of the comments that you made about the importance of letting children touch and collect nature. And sitting here thinking about working in a national park site where you know, one of the core ideas in national parks is that we not touch, you know, we not pick anything. It's an interesting question, but then there's another question, which is about the intensity of use, and just the mere intensity of use can have a significant impact on a functioning natural ecosystem. And so I'm wondering if both of you have could talk a little bit about the strategies that you have seen used that can allow for that intense interaction between children and nature without destroying the underlying health of the system.
Yeah, it's so complicated, and it's such a balance question, a question in need of balance in the approach. I think like starting with, I think all parks have a stake in trying to make sure that they have constituents who care about nature over a long period of time. And what we find, what the research says about environmental education is that the thing, when someone teacher is talking at you about the environment, people understand and they agree, but they don't act unless they've had personal experience out in nature. And what makes it, brings it home and makes it important to people is the act of collecting and breaking. And you know, E.O. Wilson, who studies ants, I think talks about, in his literature about how he became a naturalist. It's the exploration as a child and the collection and the watching of ants and the sometimes poking of ants, you know, or the catching of fish. And I think that, so if we don't allow kids to do that, we risk not having parks cared about in another 20 years. And that would be, you know, then the whole thing gets bulldozed, right? So we don't want that to happen. We want to create this connection to place. And I have on my bedside table actually shells I picked up at the beach as a child, right? So I think some of these things are kept. And so, you know, you don't have to bring them all home. You could have places where you leave some of them, like people leave their collections, but it is important to let people take a reasonably small amount home so that they can have that connection and care built. And I don't know, it depends on the place. It might be there's certain parts of your forest that are the touch parts and others that are not. It might be, or the fort building areas are not, you know. I mean, not everything, some things are more sensitive to others. And when you have 500,000 people or 1 million people coming to a place, it's a lot different than if you have 10,000 in a year. And, you know, the size and the intensity, there's balance issues, but I think to hold as a value that the need for people to pick up small things that don't impact the environment in a significant way and do impact the way they care about your place is important. And to think through, like, are there, you know, for example, in Sweden with it, they have something called every man's right. People are allowed to walk in any part of Sweden they would like and actually pick things from any property, really, whether it's owned by someone else or not. But there are rules. You can take as many blueberries as fit in your hand. And that's all. Like you can't come with buckets and sell them from some place, you know. So like, what is I think there's mushroom collection rules like that in our forests. And so thinking about like, what's the sustainable amount? Can a child take the acorns that fit in their hand and 1 pine cone, you know, or what is the, you know, something like that, a metric that would let you see and test if it's okay. This year we're testing a new new scenario. I don't know. I don't manage a park, so I can't speak from that side. I know it's complicated.
Rania?
I think, yeah, I think for us, what's going to be really challenging the first couple of years, Michael, is just getting because we're creating a site from scratch, is getting the plants established. That's going to be really hard, and we are going to have to put little barriers around the planting beds, just so the plants have a chance of surviving. But it is going to be, after the 2 years of plant establishment, we're going to have to keep replacing plants, because we do want kids to touch and feel. I mean, it's part of the learning experience after all. But I think we're going to be relying a lot on our youth leaders from the Chrissy Field Center, who are going to be trained to work with the kids, and as you said, Sharon, kind of teaching them or establishing with them kind of these limits, like how much is too much, and how do you take a little bit without destroying. So I'm really hopeful that our youth leaders are going to play a big role in that. And then, as far as the fort building, we are going to be staging materials for kids, like pine cones and all that. So we'll have all of that supply of materials that they can feel they own. They can do whatever they want with them, and that's going to be kind of replenishing on a daily basis, I would imagine.
Yeah, great strategies. All right, one last question, and then we'll wrap this up. What role can parks play in general about opening the larger understanding about the positive role of risk, especially beyond the borders of our individual parks? I think that's a really interesting question. Parks as a force for social change. And there's a follow-up question, which is this a place for actual legislation or recommendations regarding playground safety guidelines? Do we need to look back at current codes and safety guidelines through the lens of the desirability of risk? So sort of two questions. What role can risk play or parks play in the larger conversation about risk in our communities and the positive benefits of it? And then, what I read here is it really time for us to refresh those playground safety guidelines? So
it's tough.
Good questions.
I think reframing it as we're all seeking lifelong health. We're trying to that this desire to provide beneficial risk is a desire to give kids lifelong health, and better balance. The things that you get by exploring the environment, better balance, a good sense of your boundaries, what you can do, what you're capable of, pushing those, extending those, being more capable. Risk is just the word for trying something new. Hazard is actually what's dangerous, right? No one wants hazards in an environment. No one wants a bridge that's going to fall off of a play structure or something that is very likely to cause significant lifelong injury. That's just off the table. What we're talking about is trying something new, and that is the definition of risk. It's not positive or negative. And so I think if we reframe it and talk about how do we achieve lifelong health and help kids become competent, capable adults, and in a way that is that they can, some things can, as my friend Bernard Spiegel, who works with Tim Gill in England, says, some things can only be learned through experience, and the first time you try it, it's new, and so it's an experiment, right? So how do we make that okay? Yeah, I do think we need to shift some of our regulations, which have not made American kids healthier here. If you look at what other kids are doing, we have worse balance, worse physical levels of fitness. They are not working. They're there to protect the entities that own the property, which is an important thing, but they are not protecting health of children. And we haven't judged them on their ability to protect children's health. We've only judged them on their risk to protect children's death, which is kind of a pessimistic way of viewing this, right? How do we promote health? I don't know. So I mean, again,
Sharon-
I'm outside, I'm not a landowner, so.
Yeah. Isn't there evidence, I mean, that there are fewer accidents that happen? I mean, there is data out
Yeah.
there, especially in Europe, that it demonstrates that, in fact, you know, there are fewer lawsuits and fewer accidents in general in these types of playgrounds.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, the parks are, and particularly large parks, places where kids can, you know, beyond the playground, go out and explore and then share these experiences. I mean, that's where it has to be done. And to the second part of the question, all I can say is yes, yes, yes. Definitely time to, you know, revisit all of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Actually, in the chat, the data is not driving the guidelines. That's true. So yeah, if we were to reformulate things based on the research about child development and on actual injuries, we would see that the risks in our parks are extremely low, far, far below things we let kids do every day, play football, get in a car. There's a higher risk of your TV set falling on your child than the child getting, you know, and getting seriously hurt than there is on a playground. But we
Right.
don't,
Yeah,
we don't
well,
ban.
maybe as organizations take risks and those risks pan out by, you know, not seeing a huge rise in accidents, then we can begin to use that data to drive changes in standards. So, well, with that, we're at time. I'd like to thank both of our speakers, Sharon and Rania, and also Mark in absentia. And thank all of you for joining us today. And mostly thank everyone for being part of the parks world and the parks movement. I know that the last year has shown what we've all known, which is that parks are an essential part of the lives of healthy communities. So thank you all for being part of that, of the parks world, and being part of the movement to make sure that everyone in our community can grow up enjoying the beauty of the outdoors. Have a great day, and please be sure to tune in to the next World Urban Parks webinar. Thanks for joining us today. So long.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.